All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to let people get logged in. If you're watching this offline, you can just you may want to fast forward for a couple of minutes. For those of us that are watching it online, if you want to do a quick introduction and tell us where you're from, my name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia area, just outside Washington, D.C. today. I'll be the host for the Hangout. So if you want to just introduce us, tell us where you're from. And this is for the people that are watching live. If you're not watching us live, you don't have to do an introduction. If you have particular topics or questions that you want covered today, you can go ahead and type them in the comments field. We had people that had sent questions in advance. So we'll go through. I think we should be able to get through all those, and we'll get through as many questions as we can in a few hours. And also, if we have people, sometimes we have people who are generous enough to do kind of a timeline of all the topics that are discussed during the Hangout. So if someone wants to kind of keep notes of the different topics, and we could post that so people could go to specific points within the Hangout to see particular topics, that's always helpful. But we'll go ahead and get started in just a couple minutes. We'll collect questions, do some housekeeping. So if you're watching this offline, you may want to fast forward to maybe about 10 minutes before you get started. And we'll see what questions come in. We had a number of questions that came in advance. And just please feel free to introduce us and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And we'll go ahead and get started in just a couple minutes. We'll go ahead and start collecting questions. Thanks. All right, so see, Nick is online. We have Greece, we have Taiwan, Italy, and Nick is from New Jersey. That's great. All right, we have Cincinnati. All right, so some more people getting logged in as we speak. See, we have more questions coming in. So we have a question on automation. And once again, if you're just logging in, if you want to introduce yourself, you could enter in questions in the comments field for us to go over. All right, so some more questions. And Nick, I got your question in advance, so we're ready to show you how to do moving the automation with events. So we'll see if there's any other questions that are coming in. Some more people logging in. So see comment on how we can get different mix people to stop using such distortion. I was just doing some interviews with some mastering engineers, and that was a topic of discussion. So sometimes, you know, it could be not only just in the mix, but sometimes in the, you know, compression for different, you know, delivering for different compressed formats that can bring that out as well. So a couple more people logged in. Once again, feel free to introduce yourself, and we'll enter, you could type in questions in the comments field. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. So Nick asked, will I be at AES in New York City? Yes, I will be in the Yamaha booth showing the Steinberg products. And then right after AES Friday night, I go to Hamburg for some meetings. So I may cut out a little bit early on Friday, but I will be at the AES show in New York all day Wednesday and Thursday. All right, so we see Patrick checking in from Sacramento. It's great. All right, we just had some more people log in. Just getting some more questions copied over. All right. So, and some comments about where we were talking about just a little bit earlier about harmonic distortion using outboard gear or using, you know, it could be different, and, you know, you could easily distort a lot of outboard gear as well, like digital reverbs. So you could do bad gain staging in analog or software. All right, we'll see if there's some more questions sneaking in. All right, so we have Stevie from Northern Ireland. Great to have you on board. We'll wait just a minute. And again, if you have questions, we'll go ahead and get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, we'll get started here in just about another minute or so, see if there's any last minute questions. And then we'll get started. All right, some more people logging in. All right, we have Wichita, Kansas. And once again, feel free to introduce yourself. If you have questions, enter them in the comments field. right, some more people are logging in. Okay, we'll get started here in just a minute. Once again, if you have last minute questions, please feel free to enter them in the comments field. You could also ask questions as kind of part of the discussions as we work on this as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we had a question from Nick emailed in, and it was about having automation follow events. So let's take a look at how to get that set up. I'll just come over here to another project. So let's say I have automation on a particular track here. And I believe the question was how to kind of move the track and have the automation tied with the particular track. So I'm going to just open up my automation track here, and let's just draw in some automation. All right, there's my perfect mix with absolutely no gain stage issues. All right, so let's say I cut this, and a lot of times what happens is there's a little preference over here. So people may run into situations, I think what Nick had run into was when moving an event that the automation stayed where it was, and we wanted the automation to be tied to the event. So if you go to your edit menu, and at this point we could choose right here, you will see this little selection from the edit menu that says automation follows events. So we'll just check that. So once we go back to your edit menu, we can now just, anytime that the event is moved, the automation is automatically tied directly with the event. So if I copy it, those automations will be carried over directly for that range of events. So if you run into that problem again, just make sure that from the edit menu that you have a check box placed next to automation follows events, and that should take care of it. Now, we had another question from David Reuter and Kristen Parisi. Some people that come out to our meetings in Nashville. I've had the pleasure of meeting in person. And I think what they ran into was they said occasionally they get where everything gets really big, and they probably hit an accidental key command to make everything super large. And they're wondering how to kind of get all the tracks back to the same size. And probably the key that you hit to do this is the Z key. So if you hit the Z key, you can make all the tracks kind of very small or very large as we work with this. And this happens to be near, modifier keys like your Alt or Control key or Command Control on the Mac or Shift. So if you do this and realize that the tracks are all too small or too large and you want to move them simultaneously, on the Mac you would hold down Command, on the Windows platform it would be Control, and then you could just move the bottom of one of the tracks, and that would resize all of the tracks to the same uniform height. So if you accidentally are doing fast editing and your tracks look enormously large, just kind of grab the Z, you can hit the Z key to go back, and it's probably a zoom keyboard shortcut for zoom maximum height or minimum height in tracks. And you could also just do it based on holding down the Command or the control key and grabbing the bottom of one of the tracks. And at that point, you could just simply resize all the tracks to the same height. So that's an easy way to kind of navigate between different track heights. So once again, I saw we just had a bunch of people log in. If you're watching this, please feel free to introduce yourself as well as ask questions in the comments field. And we'll try to get through all the questions today in our time. But we'll go ahead and go through some of the questions. Just read through comments and copying over some questions. Okay, so let me just kind of read through some of the comments. All right, so we see a question, is there any way to automatically analyze all of the audio with VariAudio? I think you'd have to do it kind of on a track by track basis. And for those who aren't familiar with VariAudio, what you could do, and this is part of the sample editor, and at this point you could just go to the VariAudio tab on the left hand side. I don't know of a way to automatically determine pitch and warp, but maybe we could do it through a key command. Let's take a quick look. Let's see if it's just... So I don't know of a way to do it other than to do it individually for all the parts. So I think you'd have to do it individually for all the parts. Now, we had a question that was just emailed to me right before we started the Hangout, where someone wanted to be able to double click and have the sample editor show up in its own independent floating window. And this is kind of new behavior since version 9 when we came out with the docked capabilities here. So if we want to double click, we could have it by default go directly into the lower zone editor of the sample editor, and previous versions would open it into its own distinct editor. And you could actually just simply come here, and if you wanted to open in a separate window, you could just hit that key, and that will allow you to open it up into a full-size editor. But the question was dealing with the preferences and how we could get the preferences started to where it'll automatically go into its own window. So if we go to our Cubase menu to preferences, at this point we could choose editors, and when you double click you could say open in a separate window, so just under the editor's preference, or you could have it when you hit a keyboard shortcut that it goes into its own window or the lower zone. So now once that preference is set, I could now double click on my part and it'll go directly into a standard window. And the window size was also part of the question, how you could get it to be full screen, and it's just maintained whatever the last size was. So if I double click this, it would automatically go to full screen. If I minimized this window size, say to something like that, and then double click, it'll still maintain the same size for the window. So again, that preference, if you really want it to behave differently. Rather than going to the lower zone, you could again just go to the editors and double click opens in lower zone, or opens in a dedicated editor window based on the keyboard shortcut. So at that point, we could have your choice to kind of work in the previous ways, or if you wanted to work in a new docking system, if for instance you have a single screen like a laptop, something like that. So that's how you could kind of control the behavior to work however you want to with that. Okay, so I'm seeing a question, is it safe to use the send channel as output for a vocal channel? Yeah, of course. The sends are often, if I make sure I understand this, if you want to use sends on the vocal, like to add reverbs and delays, it's definitely safe and very possible to do. So no problems there. Okay, so I see a question. So I'm using Cubase 9 and I'm having routing problems using rack instruments. And it's after 4 they get lost and have no output. How can you fix this? I don't think I've run into this particular problem. So let's say if I just, and if you could be maybe more specific on what routing you're trying to do. So let's say if I have a loop mash open, I have and we'll do this as rack instruments. We'll say Groove Agent SE. And let's say a retrolog. And we'll do a Halion Sonic SE. So we've kind of added all these different tracks, and I could see all the routing here. Maybe if you could leave another comment on what routing options you're getting lost on. So we could see the available tracks as we in our mixer. So as we just kind of come over here, we can see the Groove Agent, the Retrolog, the Halion Sonic, the Loop Mash. If I wanted to add a MIDI track, I could come directly here and then we could route that to any of the available MIDI devices that were added. So if you could maybe clarify if you're having problems with the routing versus routing of MIDI or routing of audio or a combination, that could be helpful. I'll kind of leave this project open. And we had another question emailed in from Taylor, who had asked about a way to easily see which kits have patterns in them when loading up Groove Agent SE. And the easiest way that I do it is actually just right click on the Groove Agent and just say load kit with patterns, and this will kind of show me all the kits that do have patterns associated with them. So if I just wanted to come here, I could load that up, and then as soon as you choose to load the kit with the pattern, you could see all the available options that have patterns just show up directly there inside of Groove Agent SE. All right, so let me just go ahead and read through some more of the comments. All right, so we got a question. just read through some of the comments here. Just give me a second. Okay, so we have a question. How do I save my device connections globally? I think if you actually save it with a template, that those will automatically be stored globally. And I think if we get into your VST connections at this point, you could just come over here and you could see, you could save the inputs and outputs and your studio as different presets, but I believe you could save like external effects, instruments, and group effects as part of your template. I'm not absolutely positive on that, but I've been asking for a while for kind of just a global button to save all the parameters. I haven't seen it implemented yet, but hopefully maybe in the future it could be, but a lot of times saving it in a template or saving it in a project could automatically pull those different elements up, but I could be mistaken on that, but I'm pretty sure it does. Okay, so we had a question from Anthony about not understanding chaining. If you could maybe clarify that a little bit, if that's chaining like in the arranger track or chaining signals, or if you could clarify that, that would be helpful for me. All right, so I'm seeing comment on visibility. Let me just read the comment. The visibility track should have better marked chosen channels where it's now not difficult to notice. One that's got only silky shining needs to be more conspicuous, not possible to customize. So when you go to the visibility track, let's say if I'm here, at this point, I think it's pretty clear, by which tracks, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but which tracks are visible within the project. And you could store different presets. So if you wanted to go to your configurations here, we could say, okay, I just wanted to see this as configuration 1, and I wanted to see this as configuration 2. You can just kind of click here and add configurations. So now if you wanted to just navigate between your different track visibility settings, it seems pretty clear and obvious. And then you can also have different presets just to the right where you could show all the tracks, show only the selected tracks, or hide selected tracks. If you're a composer with a large template, you could actually show tracks that only have data, or show tracks that are active at the cursor position, or show tracks that have data between the locators only. So it seems like there's a lot of different visibility options that are pretty clear. So maybe I'm not understanding the question, but when you look at the visibility tab, I think it's pretty obvious which ones are hidden. But if I'm misunderstanding, please let me know. All right, so I'm seeing a couple of different comments where someone is sharing a link that I don't know if I have access to, so I can't answer the question. I don't have a link. Perhaps if you want to email it to, if you have a screenshot, something that you want to, you could maybe send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.net, and I could check while we're doing a hangout to see if if I could see. I can't really see. I don't think I have the full link. I'll try it real quick here. Yeah, but the link that I'm seeing in the Google Hangout notes text isn't working. So once again, I see the explain chaining. Maybe I'll try to get there. Maybe it's clarified a little bit later. All right, so we're seeing a couple comments that are glad that Cubase does these type of events. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so we have a question. I'm still on version 8.5. If I upgrade to version 9, is there a way to use my 32-bit plugins? You would need to buy like a third-party 32-bit bridging solution. Something like JBridge still works. But it's not ideal to still be using 32-bit plugins, as they cause a lot of system instability. But you could go out and purchase JBridge, and that will still work with Cubase 9. Also, once you have Cubase 9, your Cubase 8.5 license is still valid, so you could still run Cubase 8.5 if you needed to freeze tracks or do rendering in place with 32-bit plugins and load it into a Cubase 9 project. So, but there are options available. JBridge is a good solution if you still need to run a couple of 32-bit plugins, but overall it does add to a lot of system instability. So just be aware of that, and there's a reason why more and more companies are switching to only over to 64-bit. Okay, so we're seeing just kind of a lot of questions. I use send channel as output for vocal channel. This works. Yes, it does work. And again, I can't access your link that you're providing, so I'll see if I could retrieve it by email. All right, so we had a question on expression maps. So let's go ahead and let's add a MIDI track here. Or I'll just go to one of my MIDI tracks. All right, so I haven't made an expression map in a long time. So the question is it possible to create an expression map entry triggering on and off functions, like 0 to 64 off and 65 to 127 on? Some VSTs have that function besides regular key switch, like Consordino on and off. Let me just see. I may have to work on this offline. Let me just see. If you want, I could actually, if you want to email me, Benedict, I will work on doing that offline, and then I could probably see if we could set up an expression map, or if we have time at the end, we can come back to that. It's good to see Tony Ray Jones online from Nashville. Okay, I just got an email maybe with the picture. Let me just take a quick look, see if I could find it. All right, so I'm just looking at a picture that was emailed to me. So it looks like that would work looking at the screenshot. You know, if it's, you know, there's a number of ways to do routing, and there's no absolute way that the routing, you know, one way is wrong or the other, unless it's not getting to the signal source that you want. But it looks like from the screenshot that I could see that routing works, and you could definitely use the vocal channel like that to as a send to other devices. All right, so we had a question about changing the response of the equalizer frequency analyzer. Let me just read through it to see as it can change the speed of frequency analysis results updating. So let's take a look at a particular track here. So sorry about that, and let me just turn my volume down on this particular project. Sometimes I know some of the meters can be tied into the disk preload. Let me see if that makes any effect on the meters for the EQ. So I don't know of a way to, let me just take a quick look in preferences. I don't think there's a way to adjust the time of the EQs. I know you could kind of do it with the wave meters, but I don't know of a way to adjust the timing of the frequency response in the EQs. But I could look it up and see if there's anything, but I don't know anything off of the top of my head. Okay, so we have a question. Please show how to use a vocoder using the default effects on Cubase, if it's possible. Cubase doesn't come with a vocoder by default, but basically what happens a lot of time, if you have a vocoder plugin, what you'd want to do as soon as the vocoder is instantiated on a plugin on a particular track, you would see kind of the inserts, and let's say if you just had you see if the pitch correction will function in the same way, the pitch correct plugin. So what would happen, and this would be very similar routing to how we do the pitch correct. So if you have a vocoder plugin, most of them will take a MIDI input. So I'm just gonna, like when I open up the pitch correct plugin, I go to a MIDI track, and then I want to feed the MIDI track directly into the plugin itself. So right now, instead of it going directly to a particular MIDI port, it's feeding MIDI information into the pitch correct plugin that's on the piano part. And that's a very similar concept to how you would do routing for a vocoder. Cubase doesn't come with a vocoder, but some people will use, you know, will do some vocoding type effects using the pitch correct plugin. So it's not a true vocoder, but that may kind of give you like some different vocoding sounds. So that's one way. So again, once the plugin is instantiated, you could add a MIDI track, and for the MIDI output, just simply feed the MIDI ins. So you could play different chords if you wanted to trigger the vocoder, and then at that point just record MIDI data, and that MIDI information on this track, it then triggers the events for the insert on this track. So that's how kind of the signal flow would work inside of Cubase. So you can give that a try, but that's how it works. But you know, you can often do a lot of kind of like, you know, contemporary vocal pop techniques, which some people call vocoding, using the pitch correct plugin. So that would probably be a good place to start. All right, so we had a question about using the transpose track with chord tracks. So let's go ahead and take a look. I think I have some chord tracks in this project here. I'll just revert this real quick. Actually, I'll just do another project I know is kind of more set up for this particular. Let's see, here we go. We'll try it on a Bach piece here. Okay, so right now I have kind of all these different tracks here in the orchestral instrument automatically tied directly over. It's all going into the Halion Symphonic Orchestra, playing back through Halion 6, but it also works inside the Halion Sonic SE. So we have these following the chord track. So let's go ahead and try to add a transpose track on top of that. And what the transpose track does, and this works for audio and MIDI, is we could literally just kind of come here, and now we'll have it transpose down. So we start in G, and we'll have it transpose down to major second. And let's say I just wanted to transpose back here. So it looks like it works in conjunction. So we'll go down. So if I want to do another transposition, let's go up, let's say up a major third. So again, we just can take what's in the chord track, and even though the parts are following the chord track, the transpose track works. Go back to their tonic. So that's one way of just, so it looks like they work together. So the chord track and transpose track will always kind of be work together. So we had a question also about if there's a multimeter. So I think if we just go to inserts and under tools, you could see a multi-scope here. So at this point, you could use this as different meters to, you know, so if you want to see. Just increase the volume here a little bit. So again, you could use the multi-scope to see kind of what data is on your left and right channels. So that's kind of a very useful tool for doing a lot of different analysis functions. So again, if you wanted to find that, I just put that on my master bus here. And it's just under, so if you were to do it again, we could just come directly here and under tools. You could just go to the multi-scope, and you could use that for that different type of metering. All right, just going through some of the comments here. Okay, so we have a question how to set up a mic and record using headphones and hear the backing track on the headphones and not the monitors while recording. So if you're recording and you wanted to, you know, this is one of the great things that you can do with your headphones. You know, so some people, depending on your audio interface, will just adjust the main output volume that goes to the studio monitors down, and then the other monitors, like, and your headphones could often have a separate volume control. So if you're recording yourself in a control room and you don't want it to record the signal going directly from your speakers as part of your microphone, and you could set this up really easily kind of in the control room. So let me just open up another, sorry about that, another project. So, you know, once you're here, you could, you know, one of the great things is that there's a dedicated control room component to the mixer. And the control room can be set up kind of in the VST connections. So if you go to your VST connections here, you could go to the Studio tab, and the Studio tab, we could have different Q mixes set up here. So as we do that, we can now, when we go to kind of our full mix console view, we could have the control room set up here, and you could actually just set the control room volume down and have, you know, different Q mixes set up that are independent. So if we actually come here to your Qs, if you go to the racks, make sure that you have the Q sends activated. And when we go to the Qs, you can say, I want to send this particular track to the vocal, and then you could just have only that signal being sent to the headphone. And if you wanted to, you know, just mute what's going on, you know, you could set up to dim, but that way you could have an alternate mix that goes directly to your Q mix. Now, if this is kind of too convoluted to set up, just turn your headphone monitor volume up on your audio interface and turn the main output down. That's probably feeding the speakers, and that would probably be a quick way of doing it. But you could also set up a control room so that, you know, you're not recording the signal from your speakers when you're tracking. So okay, so we have a question. Can I use a reverb as a send effects and EQ the reverb only on each individual sound that reverb is sent to? Or do I have to create a reverb as an insert in order to EQ the reverb? Okay, so this is kind of an old clever engineering trick when you had less expensive reverbs that you wanted maybe to sound more expensive. So if we have a particular project here, and let's say if I wanted to add a reverb to this, so I'm going to go to my sends. And now at this point, we're going to, let's say we'll add an effects channel send. And let's add a reverb. So let's add the Revelation reverb. Okay, so we've now created that reverb, and some people will, what you can do if you wanted to have that reverb EQ'd. So the effects channel send that we see here, when I go to this particular channel, we could now see that, you know, in the effects return channel, we're going to have the Revelation reverb, and now you could just EQ the reverb to make the reverb sound brighter or darker. So, and that way, every source that's feeding into that reverb, you could just EQ, or again, sorry about that, use your channel strips. So if you want to compress the reverb, or if you wanted to, you know, stack up to 8 different effects, you could do that as well. So, you know, once you add the effects return channel, and you could just kind of select an audio track, right click in the sends, add effects send, and then at that point go to the effects return channel, and then you could apply the EQ on the reverb directly there. So hope that makes sense, but that's an easy way to do it. So the old days, if your reverb wasn't so lush, you may stack it with another reverb or add more high-end EQ. So that was kind of a typical workflow process in old analog days with cheap reverbs. Okay, and I think this is going back to the MIDI routing on the VST sends, or the MIDI routing question that we had with the rack instruments. And the statement is, Routing the output for MIDI. After 4 sounds, I lose the MIDI. My trigger still works, but there's no feed going or sound coming. Only allows me to put 3 sounds on a rack before they get lost. And this may tie into, I'm not sure if this is from the same person, but someone had asked if you could send a MIDI output from an instrument track. There isn't a real easy way of doing it from an instrument track, but if you have a MIDI track, one of the things that you can do is, let me see if I still have that project open. Might be here where I added a number of instruments. So let me just activate this. So let's say if I just go to Groove Agent, let me see if this is, let me go to my control room here real quick. Okay, so I'll just start off with a new project and we'll see if we can duplicate or replicate this. So I see a comment, are we allowed to ask a question? Yes. So you could enter the questions in the comments field. So let's say if I go to, and I think this was with rack instruments, I want to go to Halion Sonic SE here. And let me just load up. Just find something a little more traditional. Okay, and let's add a synth. Okay, and I'll add 2 more rack instruments. And then we'll add a prologue or retrologue. Okay, so let's say we have those instruments loaded up. So we can access all those instruments, as you can see. So we'll just come directly to our MIDI track. So we have So one of the cool things that a lot of people don't know is if you start off with a MIDI track, and this doesn't work for an instrument track, and this is kind of getting back to, can we send other tracks out? So I'm going to add a MIDI track, and let's just add maybe just a really, like a piano. So one of the cool things that you could do with a MIDI track, and you can't start this with an instrument track, so it's kind of getting back to one of the earlier questions, but if you wanted to create kind of interesting layers, you could actually go to MIDI sends, and then you could activate the send and say, here, I want this to go out to my Halion Sonic SE. So now it's going to layer both the Halion Sonic SE with the electric piano. Let's add the pad shop. And let's add the retro log. And let's go ahead and add the prologue as well. So now you can kind of create different stacks. So one voice can actually be sent out to 4 different destinations. And you can do that from a MIDI track, but not sending to an instrument track. But if you start off with a MIDI track, it could be sent to instrument tracks to make it even more confusing. Hopefully we'll see that differentiation go away at some point. I'm not sure if there's a technical reason for it, but it seems like all the layering is working as expected. But if there's still more issues, if maybe if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know in the comments. Okay, so quick question. Are the standalone devices in Absolute 3 recordable for insertion at another time into a Cubase file? I think some of them may record. I'm not sure if they record MIDI information. If they do, it'd probably be exported as a standard MIDI file, but there's no, I think usually the standalone is set up for kind of live performance use and not really intentionally within the sequencer. One of the things that you can do if you find yourself like in the middle of a particular instrument that you really do like, and let's say you're here, you could actually just, if you're in standalone mode, you could go to the rating and you could give it, usually everything by default is 3 or 4 ratings. But let's say if I just come here and I give this particular patch 5-star rating, I think this would work in standalone. When you go to look for instrument sounds, so let's say in the media bay, or let's say if I just started a new, we'll do an instrument track, and I go to my Halion Sonic SE, you could say that you're looking only for, and I'll just blow this out here, and you can say you're only looking for 5-star patches, and that way if you found something that you liked in kind of noodling around, you could set your different rating systems, and that way you can say search for only 3 stars or 2 stars, or search only for 5 stars. So if you like a particular patch that you liked, you can save it like that. But I don't know a way to record if you just kind of played like the most magical part in standalone. I don't think there's a way in most of the instruments to record it into Cubase afterwards. Okay, so we have a question. Can I view more than just the inserts and sends in the bottom mix console? I'd like to be able to view EQ, gain, etc. So currently the bottom mix console will be set up for, where you could switch between your faders, and you could also come here and switch between inserts, sends. So you have sends, inserts, faders. Within the normal mix console, you could, just come here and choose, which components of the mixer are active. So at this point, you could just say, I only wanted to see, my EQ curve and my channel racks. Looks like the faders will still be there, but you could come here and just have this set up as, let's say, you want to see routing, and let's say our EQ, and let me see what else you wanted to see just to make sure I have it right. And let's say your pre-section, so within your racks. And then you could store this as a configuration too. So if you say this will be mix configuration 1, so as soon as you, let's say, close your mix console, as soon as you go to F3, that configuration could be stored, but I don't know of a way to currently see it on the bottom mix console, but you could store it as part of a workspace, which I know people do all the time, and have those, you know, different components visible at the bottom. But currently it's the bottom lower zone mixers for faders, inserts, and sends. Okay, so again, we're seeing a question on chaining instruments or tracks. So I think we just went over a little bit of how to chain instruments together. I'm not sure what you, maybe if you could indicate what you want to accomplish by chaining the tracks. It could be kind of a number of different things. And that's from Anthony Landrum, I believe, if I pronounce your name correctly. So. Okay, so seeing a question, why don't I see the same in my Groove Agent 4, no dial and no slider? We'll go take a look. I'm not sure, let me just open up a Groove Agent so we can get an idea. I think we're just in one of our kits here. So I'm not sure which dial and slider the comment is referring to, but we'll see if we get to maybe at the end if you want to ask again. We'll just keep going through some of the comments here. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. So I'm seeing a question, any Cubase plans for right-click toolbar customization? I haven't seen any, but I've discussed it with some of the product planning group before. So I'm not sure, what's going to happen with that. But I know that there's been some discussions, but I'm not sure when we'll see any results or any changes with that. Okay, so seeing a question, just installed Cubase 9 5 minutes ago and got the message some audio files are missing. Please check installation. The problem is I can hear imported wave data, the metronome, but not MIDI data. Check to see. It could be, sometimes during the installation. I'm not sure if you updated from a previous version of Cubase, but sometimes if you don't see all the data, you might want to just go into your media bay. And sometimes, like if you've just installed it, it could be going through and analyzing a lot of different data. So if you go to the media bay, and you could open that by hitting F5, and you probably want to click in the lower left-hand corner, and then you could see this default locations. So at this point, you could go to like your VST sound and try right-clicking, and you could select these different folders and right-click and choose to rescan disk. And sometimes it might just have to still be scanning disks if it wasn't a full installation. So sometimes reinstalling will place content files, because there's a lot of content that comes with the instrument. So sometimes just reinstalling will automatically place those there as well. So it's a brand new installation. Try reinstalling again, but also go into Media Bay and see if you could just rescan the disks, and that might do the trick for you as well. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to open up projects in a Cubase 8 created template that was started in an earlier version of Cubase? I don't think that would be a problem. So I'm just going to reread it one more time, make sure I'm understanding. Yeah, as long as the files kind of, carry over, I think, sometimes some templates may incorporate features that aren't in, previous versions, but I think that you should be okay with that. Okay, so we see, can you indicate where to access archived sessions? If you're talking about the Hangouts, they're under the Google Hangouts playlist on the Cubase YouTube channel. If you're talking about other sessions like Cubase projects, it's really wherever you kind of archive them. It's wherever the files are archived or saved to. So if I misunderstood, just let me know. Okay, so I see a question. If I start Cubase 9, all other programs get muted. Why? This is probably on the Windows platform. If you go to your device, to device setup, you could see your VST audio system. And let me just check this on my computer here real quick, my other computer. All right, so it'll be the same, but you may see a choice here that says release driver when application is in background. So go to device menu, to device setup at the very bottom, select the VST audio system, and then check release driver when application is in background. And that should do the trick for you, so you could see and have access to other programs. A lot of times people will, have like their built-in audio interface for like playing YouTube and other files or iTunes, and use kind of their, and keep their dedicated audio interface for Cubase. And that'll kind of give you best results. You don't get, sometimes it could be actually, it could, sometimes sample rates can change and cause like weird issues, but try the release audio ASIO driver in background. Okay, so seeing a comment, a very frustrating aspect of track versions is that inserts and automation are not included. This is a real deal breaker when auditioning different automation curves, etc. Well, the idea, I mean, what a lot of people do, with the intention of the track versions is that you could have multiple takes and be able to, have the automation as well as like inserts and EQs be consistent and be constant, because the idea of the track version is to change to change the media quickly without having to load up, say, okay, I want to take the second take from the bass and the fifth take from the drums and hope that they line up. I can understand the argument for having automation for track versions, but I think, what some people do if they wanted to audition different curves is, just to select a particular track and duplicate the track. So let me just jump to our project. So if you wanted to experiment with different automation is to, perhaps just duplicate the selected track and experiment with automation on the duplicated track. But, I could see having more, some more, track versions for automation. I could see that, but probably how I use it and how the feature was intended was that, the different files would be consistent, so it's just replacing the media without necessarily having to, copy over a zillion different parts with that. So it's kind of consistent. So hence track versions. But I could see where you'd want perhaps a new track version of automation, and I'll pass that on again when I'm in Hamburg in a couple weeks. Okay, so we're saying question is, since updating to Cubase 9, when I render audio, the waveform is displayed really huge in the track, so it doesn't allow the shape of the waveform as it goes beyond the vertical boundaries of the track. It could be that, maybe, if you're exporting, it could be perhaps that there's something in the master fader that's causing an inadvertent gain change. So let's say if you come here, some people will just have the gain structure set really high in the mixer and do that. If it's only on that track, if it's only on the exported track, sorry about that. It's an annoying feature of Mac OS X. If it's only on that one particular track and not on the other tracks, I would think that it's going to be some gain that's going to be added in via a group or via like maybe a plugin on the master section. If you see all of the tracks become really large, something like this, it could be there's just a waveform zoom, and we can see this in the upper right hand corner here. And this would allow you to just zoom just the waveform. It doesn't change it audibly, but if you're working with very kind of low level amplitude material, like a lot of people doing radio or broadcast may have very low level amplitude, and people can zoom the visual of the waveform here. So make sure, so I see some people, send me a screenshot and you're like, oh, this is what it looks like. And why can't I edit or get a sense? It's because visually it's been zoomed. So if it's only the exported track, there's something in the processing, perhaps in a group or in a particular master fader, that's causing the gain change. So check those things, especially if it's only the exported track that's been that has the visual waveform represented that way. Okay, just read through a couple of comments. How do you make it so that when you solo an instrument here, you hear send effects? Is there a solo safe for aux channels or so? So let's say if I come here and I go back to my project that I created, where I had some virtual instruments. Let me switch this over. Okay, so I think if I go to this patch, and I'll just turn off my layers here. So let's say I wanted to add, you know, a reverb to this particular channel. So I'll just add an effects channel, send. So I'll just and we'll add a reverb. Okay, so now I play. And let's just make it like really. And I'll just go for like really large reverb. So now when I solo the track, we can see that generally the reverb gets soloed right along with it by default. And there might be a preference for this. So if we just come directly to our preferences, it could be under our mix console. So, you know, that seems like it. When I just have that, I have the reverb. So when I solo that, the reverb gets soloed with it because it's being sent to the reverb. And I think, but maybe if you hit the L button, so I think that's doing by default what you want to do. Let me just see if there's a preference that I'm forgetting somewhere. Maybe under VST. So I think that's kind of doing what you asked for, Nick. So, but give that a try. If it's not, just let me know in a comment. Okay, so let's take a look. We had a question about splitting MIDI events on a piano part with sustain pedal information. Let's see if I could recreate that.
What did you say?
All right, so let me find a piano part that has some sustain. in it. I think we should have some in here. Okay. All right, so let's say if we have the sustain here, we just split it. Let me just set my snap off here. We're just trying our project. This one's behaving a little oddly. This one probably has some. So let me go ahead and just check that preference and see what happens. We split. All right, so now I have that preference activated and we'll split. Again, let's say if I just come here, we'll just make sure these are synced. So it kind of looks like it's working to me with the controllers. Maybe if you want to send me a file, you could email to me at Club Cubase at steinberg.net. We can take a look at it some more. All right, so I'm seeing a comment on video, someone not liking the video support in OS X, no QuickTimes. What format should we use? So our engine is not QuickTime based, but what's really critical is the codec that's being used as opposed to the file format. So if you go to the Steinberg webpage, it kind of gives you a pretty detailed list of what codecs are known to work. So again, it's not the file format, but the codec that was used to compress and decompress the video is what you need to look for and not the file format. So check out those lists of supported codecs, and then that should help you. All right, so seeing a question, I can't seem to get Cubase AI after purchasing a Yamaha mixer. I already did the registration and downloaded the e-licenser, but I don't see it in software. So once you do that, you have to, once you create a My Steinberg account, you'd go to your My Steinberg account, and under downloads, that would be the program. So you want to download and install the Cubase AI from the link, and you probably do that by entering in the serial number of your Yamaha mixer. Might be required for that, but once you enter in the serial number, you'll get the download link in your My Steinberg account. So check in your My Steinberg account, and that should get you on your way. Okay, so we had a question, why is there instability in Cubase 8.5, the latest version with VST3 plugin, Auto-Tune 8.1, latest version? I recently got a copy of the latest Auto-Tune, and I haven't had any problems. I've been running it under version 9, but there could be a lot of different factors, you know, so it's not, I don't think anything, Cubase hosts plugins, more reliably than any other platform, because we obviously invented the specification. So, it could be some other things, but you may want to check with Antares to see if there's any, on the Antares forums to see if there's anything, but, they do have, their support has our latest copies of our program. We've been providing that as well to their support department. All right, so next question, explain disk preload. What is it? So as audio will be playing back, and we saw this a little bit earlier in your device setup, and when you go to the VST audio system, you could see disk preload, and this will generally be set to 2 seconds. And usually what this will allow you to do, if you have large numbers of audio files, or a computer that's perhaps a little slower, it could preload a certain number of seconds of audio, so that when you hit play, it's going to be, that audio information will be preloaded. So that's what it does. Generally, I recommend leaving it at the default value of 2, and that will kind of give you a good balance of performance. All right, and seeing further comments, so about probably with the auto-tune situation, that you got a $5,000 PC, so it's not a computer, and you have a fast hard drive. Okay, so so you had the fastest hard drive commercially available as well. It takes an entire minute to save the project when auto tune is on in Cubase, when you have tracked graph points in it. I've heard that from other people. So in auto tune is the only program that kind of runs into that situation. So you might want to investigate a little further there. But it's not really any situations that we run into with similar programs. So that might lead you to, to somewhere to look. Okay, so seeing a question, my trigger still sends, but there's no output. And I think this might be referring back to our VST instruments. So, I'm not sure if it's on an individual track that you're doing it on, or if you have 4 instrument tracks or 5 instrument tracks, but, I know people have thousands of, instrument racks and instrument tracks that don't have problems. So running 4 or 5, maybe the patches that you're loading in are taking up a lot of your processing power, or too much RAM, or you're out of memory, perhaps, something like that. But, you could run lots and lots of virtual instruments in Cubase. Okay, someone wanted me to resize an audio instrument channel settings window, so let's go ahead and do that. So let me see if that's probably what a person was running into with that question. So let me see if there's a way to kind of refix that. I seem to remember. So someone mentioned that could be a bug, and is that probably what you're running into? So I can see where that would be annoying. Let me see. Sometimes refreshing it or resizing it different ways can help. But you can see if you do that, that would be annoying. I think if you reset the preferences, that would do it, but I will pass that on. All right, just going through comments here. Okay, so I have a question about importing mono tracks. So let me just do a new project here. So I'm just importing a mono track, and I put it onto a mono track in Cubase for me. So it looks like when I imported the mono track, it just put it on a mono track for me right there. So if I import another audio track, and it could be maybe that when you come here, so I'll just import a stereo track. So I'm just going to go to File, to import audio file, and I'll go to like a stereo project here. Let me just go ahead and start with that again and import. So when I imported a mono track was created. When I imported a stereo track was created. See, hi Greg, is there any way to have edit mode functionality in Cubase like there is in Nuendo? No, currently that's the Nuendo specific feature. So I think at some point there was a sneaky way that it got introduced into the generic remote editor for a version or two. Then people found out, so it didn't work after a while. So there's no way, and that's kind of a Nuendo specific feature, and that allows you to easily position audio or events to different to visual reference in a video. So it's a really great feature, but I think it'll remain Nuendo specific for a while. Okay, so this is a question probably going back to our chord elements with the transpose. So the transpose track won't necessarily show visually in the chord track. So if you have something with the chord track and you wanted it to visually show, so the transpose track is going to kind of run on top of the chord track. But if I'm here, if I wanted to just, transpose the chord track information, and this isn't triggered by the transpose track, I could see where that could be helpful. But if you wanted to, you could just select, so they will work in concert with each other, but not necessarily integrated. But if you wanted to just come here to your root key, at this point you could say, okay, I just want to transpose it down to B or to F sharp. So whatever values are selected, you could transpose the chord track, but having the transpose track won't reflect those changes, but it still will play back in the transpose state, and then it will transpose every track that's set up to be transposed as well. So it's something to be aware of, but it may not reflect visually what's going on, but the MIDI and audio information is being transposed. So I see a question on chord pads and if it's always going to be on adaptive voicing by default. I mentioned that when last time I was in Hamburg. So, and there was, discussions of why to have adaptive voicing on or why not to, but currently it will be set to the adaptive voicing. I kind of lean that I don't want it to default that way, but that's the current behavior, but it may change. And I know there's been discussion on that particular feature. Okay, so a question: how to change the number, the order of the VCA. So let's try that. See if we can. All right, so I'm going to add, let's say, VCA to a couple of the channels. Okay, so we have multiple VCAs. And we want to change the order number of the VCA. Let me see if this is possible. So let me just come over here. I don't see a way, or I can't find a way. There may be a way to change the order of the VCA faders, but you can rename it. But the number, just yeah, I don't know of a way to change the order of the VCA faders, but maybe if you could tell me why you want to do that, I might be able to come up with something. Or if you want to email me at clubcubase at steinberg.net, that'd be great. Sorry about that. Okay, so it says, hi Greg, when using external instruments, is there a way to delay the audio playback in Cubase so the audio coming from the instrument isn't slightly behind due to the MIDI out audio, kind of the typical latency functions? I haven't run into any issues with that being out of time, but when we come here, we could just, let me just set up like a quick external instrument and see if we can get that. So I can go to my VST connections, and then we'll go to my external instruments, and let's just say I was lucky and got a montage. Okay, so I'll add an instrument track and we'll route it to our external plugin, let's say our montage. We'll create our MIDI track. What you may want to do is to actually see if you could adjust, you know, if you have the MIDI track selected here, you could adjust the timing just right here on the inspector. So that will be by milliseconds. Usually it's kind of delay compensated for, and you may want to try to, if you're running into more latency, try toggling the constrain delay compensation button, and that may solve the problem. Usually when you get a question like that, to constrain delay compensation, in previous versions to 9, it was up here in the right hand, up in the upper left hand corner, but in 9 it's going to be with the transport fixed on the bottom left hand corner if you have the transport enabled. So try that, but you could adjust kind of the timing to play back a little bit earlier or later to get it to line up if it's not lining up. But I haven't really run into problems with that, but you could check kind of what the latency is of your interface, but I think Cubase often will compensate for it. So, but if you need to manually adjust, you could just try this setting in the inspector. Okay, just reading through some more questions. All right, so see a question, is there a way to rearrange mixer tracks relative to one another? The mixer, I haven't gotten a good reason why you can't just move tracks into mixer, but any track that you move on the project window is reflected in the mix console. So you can't do it from the mixer, but you can do it from the project window. Okay, just reading through other questions. When I drag a MIDI pattern from Groove Agent onto a VST track, it creates a separate MIDI track for it. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so I'm just going to drag a pattern here from, so I have Groove Agent here as my, and now I just dragged a pattern directly to directly to the track. And that all seems to kind of be working as expected. So you could just drag. It doesn't seem to be creating another track. I've seen with other programs, sometimes it deals with MIDI files. One thing that it could be is to check your preferences. We get this a lot with other drum tools that, you know, drag and drop MIDI files. But when you go to under MIDI file, you could have it, you know, when you import the MIDI files, you could have it automatically go to MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, but I think Groove Agent doesn't work that way. But again, it just seems to, this is my Groove Agent track. If I drag it, the MIDI pattern down to my montage external instrument track, it'll go there. So whatever track I drag it to, it seems to gravitate to. So. All right, so a question, can you control quick controls with a MIDI controller? So how we can get that set up. So let's just do a new project. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Okay, so let's say if I have like a retro log here. And let me just turn that up just a little bit. Okay, so let's say I think I have a MIDI controller here, and what we want to do, sorry about that, is to go to your device setup, and then you can see kind of the VST quick controls. And I want to just set my MIDI input port. I want to say it's on this controller. I always forget which port it's actually connected to. Let me see if it's under 3. All right, so let's just say I'll set this up to go to modulate to my modulation wheel for controller 1. So then as soon as you go to quick controls, we just see, not sure which is the correct port for this. I thought it might be 2. Let me just check. Okay, so this is the correct port. So now at this point, I just have that set up, and you can kind of do the MIDI learn. Let's see if I can get it to catch my parameters here. So I'll move a knob. So at that point, you could assign your MIDI controllers here. And then if your controller has 8 knobs, you can see the controller listed directly there. And then as you move, you could adjust the 8 different parameters here. So if you don't know what MIDI information is being spit out of your controller, one of the things that you can do is go to a MIDI insert, and then there's a MIDI monitor plugin. And then you can just, okay, so this is controller 16, 17, 18, 19. So I will just kind of set this up. Usually the MIDI learn works fine, but I'll say 16, 17, and this is the MIDI controller number. So now I hit OK. We'll close this window. And now when I go to the quick controls for the VST instrument, you could just adjust those particular parameters just like that. And what's kind of cool about the quick controls is you can, have it once you have the instrument open. One of the things that's super helpful you could assign the quick controls just by right clicking, and then you could add that particular parameter to whatever quick control you want. Okay, we have a question about quantizing the ends of MIDI notes. So once you go to edit, and then once you go to, I'll select, let's say, a MIDI event here. So go to edit, then advanced quantize, and then you could choose to quantize MIDI event ends directly from there. And there's keyboard shortcuts for that. And that will go based on your quantization value that you have set here. So if I say I want to quantize all MIDI note length ends to whole notes, I can now, let's say from here, select all these notes. Then I could just do quantize MIDI event lengths to whole notes. Okay, just read through a couple of questions again. So, okay, so Alexander, we're still kind of trying to figure out the multiple sounds. So, and you mentioned that you had multiple sounds in one rack, Halion SE. So let me just set that up. Let's see if we can get this sorted out for you. So just load up a number of different patches here. Okay, so when you go to, make sure that like when you go to the MIDI, that if you want it to stack, so there's my Rhodes, but if I wanted to put this on MIDI channel 1, I can layer those different sounds. So if I wanted these all to be on the same MIDI channel, you could do stuff like that. Or if you wanted them to now be, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Then as you add MIDI tracks here, so even though I have these all set, I can now add 4 MIDI tracks. And they'll all be kind of sent directly out to my different. So, you know, if you have the one track selected here, what you want to do is just add MIDI tracks and make sure that they're going directly to the Halion Sonic MIDI port and to the corresponding MIDI channel. So hopefully that'll do the trick for you. So let me know if that's still not working further in the comments. All right, so I had a question how to do a proper render in place with Groove Agent with like multiple MIDI, multiple outputs. So let's go ahead and get that set up for us. I'll just do a new project here. And it's a question I get a lot, like how do I do mono and stereo exports when I do a render in place in Cubase. So we'll show you how we could do that. And let's say, it doesn't matter if we start with a rack or an instrument track. So I'll just load up a quick pattern here. Okay, and I'll just go ahead and record the pattern directly in. So we'll have just a little bit of MIDI data here going on. And we'll have this sync to the transport. So let me just do that with the other pattern starting, just make it a little easier down the road for me. All right, so let's say I will just hit record. Let's go to the pattern. Okay, so now we'll just hit record. Okay, so let's say I have 4 bars here of drums. And what I want to do is we could go to the mixer inside. And what I want to do is we want to, as we play, I could take our mixer here and just say I wanted to send my kick out of my master output, my snare out of output 2, and let's say the hi-hat out of output 4. Let's put the room mics to output 5. Here, I'm going to activate outputs here. So say 1 through 6. Okay. So now I have kick out of output 1, snare output 2, hi-hat output 3, and let's put our room and overheads to output 5 and 6. Okay, sorry about that visually. Okay, so now when I play, so now what I want to do is to actually just change the routing. So I'm going to create some outputs here. So what I want to do is now, and this sounds convoluted at first, but once you could actually save it as a track preset. But now at this point, I just wanted to go to my VST connections. So I could render that all as like, separate outputs if I wanted to. So what I want to do is to add 3 mono outputs, let's say for our kick, snare, and hi-hat. And then I wanted to add 2 stereo outs. Okay, and these actually don't have to be connected anywhere. So we could leave these all to not connected, if I remember correctly. Again, once you set this up, you can just save it as a preset. Okay, so at this point, what I want to do is take these outputs and route them to, so we're going to go to our mixer. And then in the routing, I'm going to say mono out. And then we're going to set our snare to mono out 2, our hi-hat to mono out 3, our overheads to stereo out 2, and our rooms to stereo out 3. And let me just see if I'll just solo my kick here, just make sure I have the routing correct. Okay. So now that I have that routing done, if I've done everything correct, I could just choose to render in place, and we'll go to the render settings, and I want to do the complete signal path, and so now that I've rendered, I have my stereo and mono tracks kind of all done. So that way you could actually send it out and do different renderings when you work with that. So again, what you want to do is send these to individual outputs, route those to the channel configurations in your VST connections, and then just be able to render, and that will do the complete signal path for you. I see a question. How do we open .all files? And those are from Cubase versions from 17 years ago, like Cubase SX, that was before year 2000. And what you could do is you could still download an SX3 or an SL3, and with your current license, you could open the files, a .all or .arr file, and open those files and then save it as a .cpr file. So, and if you go to the Steinberg webpage, you could download the SX3 license, which will work with subsequent versions, so like version 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 through 9. And then you could just simply import and export, import it as a .all and save it as a .arr. All right, so someone's mentioned that they got a Cubase AI 9 and they have an Avid artist controller. So what you need to do to get that configured is to go to your device menu, to device setup, and click on the plus sign. And probably the Avid artist is going to work under Eucon. So I don't have a Eucon device installed. But at that point, that's where you could tell it once you have the Eucon drivers installed. You could just simply do the routing directly there, and that will go and enable your Eucon, your Avid artist to work directly with Cubase. So again, go to your device menu, to device setup, and at that point, click on the plus sign, and then you could just add the Eucon controller and configure it from there. Okay, so just a question: after bouncing lanes track, saving project, and opening it again another time, is there a way to go back to see all the lanes tracks again? I believe they should still be there. Let me just give it a try. I'll just do a quick cycle record test here. And one thing, if you wanted to, I'll show you just that. So if you may have wondered why everything wasn't kind of visible in the previous bounce, I had the kick drum soloed. So again, if I render in place, so then you have mono and stereo files kind of all present together. So let's say we've done, just undo that, just in case someone was wondering. So let's say we see our lanes now. And I think you mentioned the bounce selection. So it looks like the lanes are still visible. One thing that some people will do if they're working with that is, let's say, if you have this, one of the things you could do is to save all the lanes. If you just select the lanes like this, you could right click and say create tracks from lanes, and that way all of your other tracks can still be visible and accessible. So that's one feature a lot of people don't know. So if you want, we have people who want to stack a number of different tracks together. So at this point, you could select the lane just by holding down a shift key and then right click and create tracks from lanes. It's another handy little trick. So I see a question about using Vienna Pro. It says I use Cubase on a Mac with Vienna Ensemble on a PC. And when I have all my libraries, where I have all my libraries in Cubase, the instrument is VE Pro, and I set up the tracks under each VE Pro instrument. I can add MIDI data to the tracks, but I have to go to the output track either in the main screen or mixer to add automation, which could get a little confusing when I have a lot of tracks. Do you know if there's a better way to set up Cubase with VE Pro? I think that's how a lot of people work. I don't work with VE Pro, so I don't have much experience with it. But it could be dependent on if you're using instrument tracks, may consolidate those two items. So I'm not sure if you're using instrument tracks or loading it as an instrument rack, but you may want to see if you loaded it as an instrument track, if that makes a difference, and that could maybe consolidate those two so that those aren't kind of separated. So maybe give that a try. I know it's probably a nightmare if you set up your whole template for instrument tracks or instrument rack to then switch it to an instrument track, but give that a try, and I think that might consolidate it for you. All right, so question on quantization. What's the best quantize setting to push the notes a little bit closer to the beat but still leave a human feel? And that's kind of exactly what iterative quantization does. So when you come here, and it's going to be under edit, and you go to, even now, if you go to your quantize panel, you can see this little button here that's IQ mode, and this will give you a percentage. And what this percentage allows you to do is, if it's set to 80% or 90%, it'll quantize the beat 90% close. It'll quantize the note 90% towards the beat. And then the next time, if you apply the quantization again, it will just apply it another 90% of the portion that's left. So this way, it'll do it in percentages. And I think that's exactly what you want to do. So you can play around with some of the different percentages, but you want to just, from the quantize panel, just activate the iterative quantization mode right here. So you can just see IQ, and then you can see your percentages, and that will do, I think, exactly what you're looking to do. All right, so you have what's the key to change grid resolution, i.e. eighth notes to quarter notes, etc. So I don't think it's a default keyboard shortcut. It used to be like 1, 2, 3, 4 in older versions of Cubase from 17 years ago. I'm dating myself, but it used to be able to change. I think it goes based on the quantize setting. So if you go here to your key commands, you can now just set up your key commands here to set quantize to, whole, half, quarter, eighth, 16th. So I think if you set that up, that is what the grid can be applied to directly when you want to. If it's set to use quantize value. So I think if you just adjust that, set up the key commands, and again, that key commands are going to be under the quantize category, set it there, and then in the snap type, use the use quantize setting. Okay, so question, I use 2 monitors. I save a project with the main window, monitor 1, and the mix console, monitor 2, but every time I open it up, it's all on monitor 1. I haven't run into that problem. I've been running multiple monitors for 20 years with my Cubase setup. Perhaps, I'm not sure if you have a, if you're working from a template, but maybe if you have a template that, or an auto load song that, automatically starts up your Cubase, if you start with the template that's set up for 2 screens, maybe that works. Or, depending on the version of Cubase, if it's before 8, you may have to drag over the gray screen, depending on your Cubase version. But you could always set up workspaces as well to have that work. But I haven't run into that in a long, long time. But try those things. All right, so we had a question. Can you rename the output of the instrument tracks? We'll give it a shot in the mix console. So let's say if you just type in the name here. All right, let's get to our mix console view. So if you just double click, you can rename the name. So you say this is bass synth, whatever. So just double click in the name field. You can say and then as soon as you go over there, you could just see the name that you typed in. All right, so question about a key command for doing selected overlapping MIDI notes. So let me go ahead and sorry about that. So let me just come here and we'll choose to delete So let's see if there's a key command for that. So it looks like under preferences, let me just see if it's, so under MIDI, looks like the delete overlaps for mono or polyphonic stuff. And there's key commands. I'm not sure if there's one assigned. Doesn't look like there's one assigned, but you could assign your own key command for that. Just going through some of the comments that were sent in. All right, so I see, can you assign a keyboard shortcut to switch between stereo and mono in the control room? I believe we could do that. Let's just go up here to our control room. And I think we should see the downmix presets available. So you could just do, if you have just stereo mono, you could just use this key command, select next downmix preset, and that will toggle back and forth between stereo and mono. I see some questions on, if it's truly sorry about that, if it's truly mono, doing a downmix preset, it'll be mono over 2 speakers, which is often what you want to check. I actually have it set up for my 5.1 system. I used a center channel as a mono in my control room, so I could go to like my 4th speaker set, which is just a mono, and hear everything out of the center channel. So if you want to be true mono that way, you could do it and just set it up as a different monitor source if you have a different speaker just laying around. So a question, how do you control plugins that don't have MIDI learn? And someone mentions, I think, motion by output. Generally just about any VST plugin you can open up and see, a lot of it can be controlled. Like let's say if we go into the editing of a particular voice here. Through quick controls. So if you're here, you could just often, you could set up quick controls for different parameters. that could be done. These are all kind of set up for you, but try right clicking. You know, sometimes if the plugin isn't capable of doing it, we can't add that functionality to the plugin. So that could be the instance that you're running into. So you should contact them. I see a question, is Cubase going to be usable with the new Windows update coming out soon? I would hold off on, until doing it, because we have to go through a lot of extensive testing after new OSs come out. So it's not just it should work. They go through, thousands of different tests to make sure different functions are working. And Steinberg actually found some of the bugs in Windows 10 when it was initially released, and we were criticized for not being compatible with it, but the problems that we found kind of helped everyone with Windows 10. So I would hold off instead of updating OSs initially. Seeing comments about the lack of replace audio and video file with new video engine. For those who aren't familiar with it, with 9.03 and Nuendo 8, there is a brand new video engine that was included. It doesn't include the replace audio and video file functionality. I'm not sure when it will be reintroduced, but I will be going out for some meetings in Hamburg, so I'll probably have a better idea after that. So I know it's kind of a bummer. I'm kind of bummed out about it myself as well. All right, so we have a question, when will Cubase 9.5 or 10 be released? Usually, it's kind of the schedule that's been pretty consistent, so I can't really say when it's going to come out, but I'm sure there's a lot of developers working very hard on it as we speak. Getting back to the Eucon question, it might be that the Cubase AI version may not support Eucon. That could be one of the differences, but you may want to make sure that you have all the Eucon software installed. But I think you mentioned you had the Cubase AI 9, that may not support Eucon, but I would have to check just to make sure, but that's a possibility. All right, so we had this question again about how can we use 32-bit VST plugins. So you'd have to get like a third-party bridging solution like JBridge. All right, so we have a question on any suggestions how to have lyrics scrolling while recording, and what's the easiest way to input lyrics. And someone had mentioned doing it in the score editor. So if you wanted to, let me just find a project that has some MIDI information in it. We'll just go here and we can show you how to input some stuff and input lyrics with the score editor. I'll find something a little more interesting, sorry. So I know a lot of people you could, in the score editor, you can just come directly here. If you go to other, you could just kind of type in lyrics. And then you could just kind of hit the tab key. I guess Cubase didn't like that. And then you could hit the tab key, and that will take you to the next note as well. Let me just get this re-going again. All right, let's go to the next question while we're getting this opened. All right, so I see a question. Is it possible to use ASIO for all with Cubase and the Yamaha TF1? I'm trying to use the Yamaha Steinberg ASIO driver, but playback will not work. I can also use the Audinate via. So do you have the, make sure that, it sounds like maybe you don't have the, maybe there is something with your Dante virtual sound card, but you should be able to do everything from your Dante virtual sound card. So if you go to your device setup, to your VST audio system, I don't have it configured, but you should be able to have the the Dante virtual sound card be addressable. So if it's not showing up, there's perhaps something wrong with your DVS audio card, but you could use it. But I can't remember if TF1 does audio over USB. So if you're, I think you could use the, if you're doing the, if you're doing it with the Dante driver, you'd have to use the Dante virtual sound card. But if you're doing the USB driver, that's when you could use the Yamaha Steinberg USB driver. So make sure that you have those configured correctly. So we have a question on when will sends be saved with track presets. What I do, I'm not sure when. I'll kind of re-ask again. But currently it saves. I think if we have, let me just create. I think you could use track archives to maybe accomplish the same thing. It's not a track preset, I realize. Just jump back here. All right, we can find something else. All right, so let's say if I have this stored and I add an effect send to this, going to, say, a reverb. So now if I save these two and I export selected tracks, and I'll just put this onto my desktop. If I did this correctly, we could import a track archive. And now we can see that that is going to be stored. So if you needed to do it, I know it's not a track preset and it's kind of stored differently. Hopefully, you know, they may change that, but if you absolutely need to do it, you can do it as a track archive, and that will maintain the sends as well, as long as the send effect and the tracks are exported and included within the same track archive. Okay, so I had a question about soloing MIDI events in regions. Think that we can kind of maybe do this through like a clever macro. So let's say let's say if I want to just solo that particular range, let's see if we could create a macro to do this really quick. We'll see if I could take a stab at it real quick. If not, I could have it for the next meeting. So let's say if I want to let's see if we can get this going. Let's say go to okay, so I think first thing we want to do is set up a split. Then I just want to check status of I think we could do just a quick preferences to we're going to nudge it. All right, so let's see what this does here so far, and I'll just do it for this. Okay, we'll just try this. Sorry, it's probably taking too long. It's incredibly boring. And let's see what this does for me. Okay, I think I'm 2 key commands away, so I'll give it a try. Appreciate everyone's patience. All right, I'm going to play with this. I know we're running short on time, but I will have that macro. Nick, if you want to email me, I'll just kind of get it tweaked. I think I'm like 1 or 2 steps from getting something to being able to do that. Sorry, it just took a little while. All right, I know that we're just about out of time, and I'm going to have to go pick up my son from school in just a couple minutes. Any just last minute quick questions? Just a super quick question. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions. I'll kind of take notes and we'll include them in the next Hangout. I'm going to be in Hamburg in a couple weeks. We may try to do a Hangout from Hamburg if we can get all the technical stuff worked out. But we'll be announcing a date in the next couple weeks. I want to thank everyone for questions. If there's just a super quick question, we'll wrap up. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we went for just about 3 hours. So I want to thank everyone for participating in the Hangout and for such wonderful questions. And if you want to email me if I didn't get to your particular point, or if you need more clarification, please feel free to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. And we'll see if there's one last minute quick question. Sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions, but this is always a great thrill for me to help you guys out, and hope everyone's learned something. I saw a question: is 16 gigs of RAM better than 8? Yes, and 32 is better than 16, and 128 is better than 64. So. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions, and we'll see you on the next Hangout. I hope everyone's learned something, and we'll have a great evening, and we'll see you guys on the next Hangout. And again, if anyone wants to, send questions in advance, we'll try to get to them. But this is always a great deal of fun for me to help you guys out, and hope everyone's learned something. Thank you very much.